Hey guys, and welcome to the Understanding Child Abuse and Neglect and Mandatory Reporting Laws Professional Development Resources. I'm going to jump into this pretty quickly and go over all of these different aspects of our requirements to make sure that we are, one, protecting the students in our care, and then two, doing that in a way that best meets their needs morally, ethically, and legally. So real quickly, for Wagner Public Schools, there are three individuals within our district that we would work with predominantly when we have questions or concerns regarding the reporting of sexual abuse, neglect, or any of those kind of things. And that's Terry Hoffman and Tiffany Steele, who are our DHS district personnel, and then Officer Nevitt, who's our school resource officer. And then if we are going to make a report, if we are actually going to follow through on making a report, the DHS hotline there at the bottom, go ahead and take a moment, pause this, do whatever you need to do, write down these phone numbers, put them in your cell phone. Most of us have the email addresses for Ms. Hoffman and Ms. Steele, but maybe you need to also put Officer Nevitt's email address on your database. I will tell you this is going to be one of the questions at the end. So just a little heads up that you make sure that you have that information available to you so that one, if you have an issue, you know who to call, and then two, so you can pass the quiz at the end. Also, I put this up front as well so that you would know I'm going to have this presentation available to you guys in your Google Drives so that you can pull this up. These three links, the bottom two show places where you could go look at warning signs of abuse and tip sheet and how to respond when a student discloses abuse to you in some way or another, which always isn't always going to be something like, hey, my dad's abusing me. It may be more along the lines of sharing something that they know about sexual vocabulary that they shouldn't know at their age, or comments about being touched in a way that made them feel funny. And so those two at the bottom give a lot of information about what to look for. The one at the top, the Oklahoma State Department of Education presentation on educators as mandatory reporters. That's where I steal a lot of the information that I'm going to go over, because that covers the process by which we report, and then kind of some of the expectations and best practices for it. All right. So aspects of mandatory reporting. Any person may report suspected abuse. However, mandated reporters are held to a higher standard of responsibility. If you read the state law, it kind of goes in order of doctors, nurses, then teachers, and then everybody. So if you have a reasonable concern, you are a mandated reporter. You don't need and often won't have specific proof. You're looking for a reasonable concern, okay? And so we'll go over this here in a little bit about what reasonable concern might look like. Reporting supersedes confidentiality, FERPA, HIPAA. As a mandated reporter, the legal requirement supersedes your professional duty to keep information about clients confidential. And so oftentimes, especially, having worked with students for a while, sometimes they may want to tell you something and they'll ask you if you can keep it a secret. Never promise a student that you can keep it a secret. One thing I always say is, I won't promise to keep it a secret, but I promise that you can trust me to do the best with that information that I know to do. And oftentimes that means it doesn't go any further. They may tell me they're having an argument with one of their friends and there's no need for me to go talk to somebody else about anything. But if there's something about abuse or something like that, you never want to promise a child or a student that you will keep something a secret, but just promise them that they can trust you to do the best with that information that you know to do. Mandatory reporters are always required to report child abuse, not just when they are on duty and not just with students in their classroom. So if you're at the grocery store, if you're at a ball game, you should make a report. If you have reason to suspect abuse, regardless of where it's at or what you are doing, you should make a report. Mandatory reporters do not need proof to make a report. The standard is simply having a reasonable suspicion that abuse is occurring. This could include one or more of the following. You witness it, a child discloses abuse to you, you see suspicious patterns of behavior concerning school content or physical signs of harm, you have witnessed a pattern of boundary violations by an adult or youth. So watching for those things, putting those pieces together, if you have reason to believe, reasonable suspicion that abuse is occurring. If you suspect, report. Here are the 3 key points. If you receive additional information, you can always call back and add to the report. If additional reports are made for that same child, then sometimes multiple reports can lead to an investigation. That happens more often than people realize. A teacher at school may kind of feel that something's happening. A coach for youth sports might feel like something is happening. And so multiple reports about the same child might be a tip that there is something more to that. So always err on the side of the child. Report what you know. Let the professional questions guide your responses. And refrain from guesses or extraneous information unrelated. And they're going to walk you through what those need to look like, whether that's a police department investigator or a DHS investigator. They're going to give you the questions that they need for the information they need to follow through. If you're wrong, one, we're protected from liability for reporting, as long as, again, we're making a good faith effort to report suspicion of abuse. It is better to make a report and be wrong than to not make a report and be right. Must I personally make the report, or can I just tell my boss? This was one I was confused on years ago. A mandated reporter must personally make the report. You can't go to your administrators and tell them you have to make the report, otherwise it's hearsay. But if you have the suspicion, you need to make the report. Afterward, you should inform your supervisor about the report. So talk with your school counselors, your administrators. Of course, obviously, if the report includes someone like that, you obviously would not want to share that information, but don't wait for permission. You don't need Mr. Holmes or Mr. Humphreys or Mrs. Fleming's permission to file a report. As an educator in Oklahoma, you are a mandatory reporter. You are not an investigator. You are not law enforcement, a jury, a judge, or DHS. And oftentimes, well-meaning teachers will try to become at least the investigator to try to get more information to give to the law enforcement. Remember, that is not your job. You are just a reporter. You have suspicion based on what you have seen, what you've been told. And so you want to get somebody who has a legal obligation and authority to follow through on those suspicions. Educators are mandatory reporters by law and moral social obligation. Reporting or abuse or suspected abuse is a request for professionals to investigate further. While reporting does not guarantee the family situation will improve or whatever that situation might be, not reporting guarantees that if abuse and neglect exist, it will continue and they will perhaps suffer more harm. All right. So again, Oklahoma law, failure to report, there's some different things about if you do not report, there are repercussions and consequences for that as well. This is part of that state law requiring schools to have a part of the Safe Schools Committees is our responsibility is to make sure that you have this information. So here's one on human trafficking. And so we're going to kind of shift gears a little bit to talk about that. And I know this is another one that we think is a big problem, but we don't necessarily see that in our communities. Just this last year, a young lady was kidnapped from a Dallas basketball game. I think it was at Dallas Mavericks, and was found at a hotel in Oklahoma City. And in recent history in Wagner, we did have a young lady that was propositioned online by an individual that had come to Oklahoma illegally from, I believe, Mexico. And so it is something that does happen in our area. So if you have reason to suspect human trafficking, there's the phone number for that and an anonymous tip line online for that as well. So indicators of human trafficking: person appears disconnected, seems to be, the person is with someone who seems to be in control of the situation, person is fearful, timid, child has stopped attending schools. And so you can see all of those different indicators. I'm going to kind of fly through a little bit of this just because I know you are capable of reading. Chronic runaway homeless youth. This might be one of those situations where we have a new student come in. Maybe he's been here for a few days and then is gone. We can't get a hold of parents or their guardians. They lie about their age, carrying hotel keys, all of those different things. Going back to the child abuse and neglect, child abuse and neglect can be physical abuse. Neglect is, we'll look at some examples of these here in just a few minutes. There's often a fine line between abuse and discipline. Discipline is a learning process. Abuse is not. Abuse does not teach alternative corrective behavior. Therefore, abused children do not learn how to correct their behavior, only how to avoid punishment. Some characteristics that may contribute to child abuse can come from adult caretaker, environmental conditions, societal attitudes. And so when we are looking at different things that might cause or create an environment for that, if there's an unemployment change in financial situation, death in family, changes in family structure, inadequate housing, another pregnancy or birth in the family, or change in place of residency. Now, as we go through that list, we might also see that these are also conditions that might create disruptive behavior in a child. So as you're looking at these things and you see a student that's maybe acting out of their normal pattern of behavior, look for these underlying environmental conditions that might exist. Children who run a higher risk than normal are preschoolers, single-parent homes, latchkey kids, premature or sickly infants, children from stressful family situations, or children with physical and mental disabilities. Questionable situations might include parental substance abuse, failure to obtain immunizations, failure to use seatbelt restraints as required by law, educational neglect, latchkey children where they're often left to their own devices to take care of themselves. So physical abuse indicators include unexplained bruises and welts, unexplained burns, unexplained fractures, unexplained lacerations or abrasions. Neglect, medical needs, lack of supervision, consistent hunger, inappropriate dress, poor hygiene. Often these are the kind of students that would fall asleep in class, regularly displays fatigue, poor social skills, struggles possibly to get along with other people because they don't know how to interact with other people, frequent absences. So here's a situation, kids get bruises sometimes, running, they may trip, fall, whatever. But then there's suspicious bruising. And I would add to this maybe around the arm, especially the upper arm, where maybe somebody has been grabbed. And so you might see sometimes those handprint bruises around the bicep area of a child or around their forearm where they've been grabbed violently. Behavioral indicators of caretakers who might be emotionally abusive. They treat children in the family unequally. So not just, so-and-so is the favorite, but the obvious inequalities. Blames or belittles child for things that may happen, blames a child for divorce, blames a child for being in poverty. Parents are cold and rejecting, or the caretakers. Withhold love, lacks nurturing skills, ignores child's problems, unrealistic demands, or impossible expectations without regard for the child's ability to accomplish those things. Remember, do not wait. Whatever you're doing, stop and report. So again, this is some of the things that we talked about earlier. If a child discloses abuse or neglect, do not investigate. Allow the child to continue speaking, but do not ask probing questions. Just report. And oftentimes there's a delay from a report being made to the local office receiving it. If you believe abuse or neglect to be occurring in the home, you need to call immediately to ensure the appropriate response if possible. Again, we can contact, if you're reporting something like this, Officer Nevitt in that DHS hotline, and then also follow up with Miss Terry or Miss Tiffany. So then again, there's the phone number. Some tips would be to, when you make your call, record the name of the person taking the report and the number assigned to your report. It is critical to reflect as accurately as possible the nature of the abuse or neglect. Do not overstate nor minimize the extent of the suspected abuse. Sometimes we have a tendency to either dramatize a situation or to kind of, it wasn't that bad, minimize it that way. Just state just the facts. So the following information will be requested by DHS when you make your report: name, age, and gender of the child, parent or guardian name, address, phone number, and direction in children's homes, parent's place of employment, description of the suspected abuse, and current condition of the child. So abusive injury, cartilage in the ear, head trauma, bleeding, and the red dots around the eyeball. The neglect, and this goes beyond a just poor housekeeping. This is dangerous material, food left molding with parasites, rodents, things like that create a risk of disease, danger to the child's health, all of those things. So one thing that we added on here is that there's a constant shortage of foster homes for children statewide as well. There's been a new thing of asking school-based social worker if a teacher or appropriate staff member would consider fostering a child. If you're interested, please consider applying to be a foster home or temporary monitor for the children who are in need. All right, so that concludes that. If, again, you have questions or concerns regarding suspected abuse, don't hesitate to contact one of those three people we mentioned up front, Miss Terry Hoffman, Miss Tiffany Steele, or Officer Nevitt, and they'll be able to answer your questions and guide you appropriately.